When General Marcus Vall stepped off the dropship, no one believed the silent human belonged here, not on the elite training grounds of Apex Prime, where warrior species trained for intergalactic war, and where only the deadliest survived the year. The recruits had gathered at dawn under the shadow of twin moons, surrounded by jagged black cliffs that looked like they had been clawed from the bones of fallen titans. The sky was red with haze, and the wind carried the scent of scorched metal. From yesterday's failed mech test, when Marcus arrived, there was no announcement, no special welcome, only the sound of his boots touching the iron ground, and the flicker of helmets turning toward the lone human with unreadable expressions. Others had come from fire worlds, gas giants, hive planets forged in war, bred for violence and survival. There were the Drask with razor-bone arms, the six-eyed Valkyrie, who moved like shadows, the crystalline Lothan who could withstand plasma without flinching, but Marcus looked like a man who got lost on the way to a briefing. His Earth standard uniform was faded from age, and his hair was cut short with no flair or insignia. Not even a rank patch, just a name strip that read Vol. He carried no weapons, no gear, not even the multiviscope every recruit wore around their necks like a trophy. They whispered as he passed, thinking maybe he was an observer, or worse, a political favor, some planetary counselor's son, sent here to play soldier. A joke among monsters. He did not speak when the Apex instructor barked orders. He did not nod when asked if he understood. The class list showed his name at the top, marked with old military clearance codes no one recognized, and when questioned, he only stared back with the kind of stillness that made even the Apex uneasy during orientation. They ran drills through the bone fields, where rusted armor from past classes still lay buried. Marcus jogged quietly behind the others, not falling behind, not pushing ahead, just observing, not even breathing hard. When the climb got vertical, and the gravity increased to double standard, some watched him from the corners of their visors, waiting for the collapse, waiting for the human to crack. But he never did. He just kept moving, one foot after the other, with the same calm rhythm that sounded like a countdown they didn't know had started that night around the barracks. Fired the recruits traded battle stories, some scarred, some invented, and some sung in alien war tongues. Marcus sat on the edge of the shadows, staring into the flames with the same silence he had worn all day. When someone asked what wars he had fought in, he said nothing. When they laughed and threw bones at his feet, he said nothing. When the Apex elite stood and towered over him like a beast, daring him to react, he only looked up with a gaze that was neither angry nor afraid, just patient, as if he were waiting for the universe to catch up. And somewhere, deep in the sensor grid, a senior trainer watching from the control tower leaned forward, replayed the footage, and whispered under his breath, "I have seen eyes like that before, and every time something breaks." He walked through towering alien recruits who sneered at his quiet steps and old Earth uniform while they boasted scars and victories. Marcus only watched and said nothing, not even during roll call, where each recruit stepped forward and shouted their name and victories and kill counts like tribal drums echoing across the mountains. The instructor, a 10-foot Apex warbird with skin like obsidian and teeth like razors, called his name last, and the silence that followed was long and deliberate, as if Marcus had muted the air itself. No salute, no motion, just a quiet glance that made the instructor pause. For the first time in years, they began training in the Blood Ring, an open arena of scorched stone and gravity traps designed to disorient and exhaust. Only the most elite survived the first week, while the rest were sent home broken or buried in orbit. The first drills were designed to force cooperation among species, but the Apex elite had no interest in working with the silent human. They rotated Marcus through 6 different squads. None of them kept him longer than a day. They said he refused to speak, to contribute, to bond. And while others built teams, Marcus built something else, quietly memorizing how each moved, how they hesitated, how they struck, and how they left themselves. Open instructors noted it on their tablets with confused expressions. He scored low on all cooperative metrics, but somehow he never failed a task. Even when his team fell, he completed the objective alone, without words, without weapons, sometimes without even being noticed, until it was over. And the rest were picking themselves off the ground. One Valkyrie called him a ghost, another said he moved like the dead one. Drask tried to challenge him in the mess hall, smashing a steel tray against the wall, demanding a fight. Marcus stared at the dent in the wall, then turned his back and walked away, not because he feared the Drask, but because something about the moment bored him. Later, the Drask was found unconscious outside the wait hall with no witnesses and no memory of what happened, only a bruise across his jaw that looked suspiciously like a human boot tread. After that, fewer dared to approach him. With threats they whispered instead, especially the younger recruits who had seen him move in combat class, and noticed something none of the instructors seemed to be acknowledging. The way Marcus never reacted but always responded, the way he never flinched but always struck when needed, the way he saw through people, as if they were already telling him everything without speaking a word. They began testing him in harder scenarios. Mixed species battles, shifting terrain, even full immersion sims, with real pain feedback. Marcus said nothing through it all, never screaming, never cursing, not even when sliced across the shoulder or dropped from height. He stood, dusted himself off, and waited for the next trial like he was just passing time. Some thought he was broken, others started to wonder if he had ever truly been human at all, but one instructor, an old Lothan veteran, kept watching closely and whispered in the locker bay to another, "This one is waiting for something, and when it comes, we will all feel it." Combat class was chaos from the moment it began, every species lunging, grappling, unleashing their own style of destruction, in a frenzy of sound and sweat and raw survival energy. The Apex instructors barked orders in multiple languages translated instantly through neural implants, but Marcus never seemed to need translation. He understood everything with the same eerie stillness he had shown since the day he arrived. While the others fought with desperation or fury, he stood motionless on the sidelines, arms behind his back, eyes scanning the movements like he was solving a puzzle, not watching a fight. The instructors rotated pairings, constantly hoping to find a weakness in him, hoping the human would flinch or fall, or at least show frustration when overlooked. But Marcus never protested, never asked for a turn, never even adjusted his stance. As days passed, more and more recruits started to notice that he was not just silent. He was studying every detail of every match, from footwork to breathing rhythms to how long it took each opponent to recover from a missed strike. He was memorizing the shape of their failure and storing it for something no one could predict. A squad of Valkyrie began calling him the Hollow Man, because they said he had no aura, no energy signature, no presence, even when standing right beside them. One said it was like standing next to a dead system, still hot from its last star but lifeless. Just the same, others dismissed him as a fluke, a lost relic from Earth with nothing left to offer, except maybe some outdated tactics from forgotten wars. But one by one, they stopped laughing because something about the way he watched them unnerved even the boldest Apex. One afternoon, an instructor finally called his name for combat. His opponent was a hybrid mechburn giant called Raxon, fused with cybernetic limbs, and known for having torn 3 trainees in half during his last cycle. Marcus stepped into the ring, still wearing the same faded uniform, his boots leaving quiet footprints in the dust, while Raxon activated his thermal blades and roared for blood. The crowd of recruits leaned forward, expecting to see the human reduced to pieces within seconds, but Marcus did not react to the blades or the threat or the jeers echoing around him. He just waited until the starting horn. Raxon charged with the speed of a cannon blast, his limbs extending, his strike aimed to cleave Marcus in two, but in one subtle shift the human stepped aside and the blade passed through air, missing by centimeters. Raxon turned, swinging wide with a backhand, but Marcus dropped low and spun with almost lazy precision, slipping through gaps in the hybrid's movement like wind through steel scaffolding, never striking once, never countering, never panicking, just moving with quiet certainty until the match timer expired and both were still standing. The instructor called it a draw, but the crowd knew better. Raxon had thrown everything and landed nothing, while Marcus had used only motion to dismantle a killing machine in front of everyone. Yet again, he said nothing, simply nodded once and walked back to the sideline, where he resumed watching as if nothing had happened. But the silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Some thought he was broken, others said he was calculating, but the Apex elite, the genetically enhanced warlords of the program, called him dead weight and began pushing harder with each day. It began with small things: a shove in the corridors, an intentional misfire during drone drills, an overloaded kinetic charge placed near his mat during sleep cycle. But Marcus never reacted. He simply moved through each assault with the same detached awareness that made it impossible to provoke him. And that made them furious, because they wanted him to crack, to speak, to fight, to bleed. They called him Ghost in a voice box, because nothing came out of his mouth, not a word, not a threat, not even breath, when he moved, and the name stuck across training sectors. His legend began to grow, but not the way legends usually did. There were no victories to brag about, no witnesses catching him perform anything overt. Instead, there was only a long, quiet trail of near misses and strange accidents that always seemed to happen to those who tried to push too hard against him. An Apex named Dovart took it further, a decorated elite, known for breaking new recruits in their first week. He announced in the mess hall that he would break the human in front of everyone, and that silence would bleed just the same as a scream. The hall erupted in approval. Even some instructors watched with hidden grins because this was Apex Prime, and pain was tradition. Devar approached Marcus, slow, deliberate, towering over him like a walking monument of war muscle and armor and sharpened bone. He shoved Marcus once, then twice, demanding he stand and fight. Marcus remained seated, calmly eating his meal, chewing slowly like nothing had happened until Devar slammed a power gauntlet into the table, sending it flying across the room, and drawing silence from the crowd. Marcus stood without urgency, his eyes never rising above Devar's chest, and for a moment no one moved, the air thick with expectation. But then Marcus stepped aside, not backward, not in retreat, but sideways, with a calculated ease that made Devar hesitate without knowing why. The next day, Devar was reassigned, no explanation, no debrief, just a blank entry in the rotation logs, and an instructor quietly noting that the Apex had filed a request for trauma re-evaluation. Marcus said nothing, as always, and took his place in formation, like nothing had changed. But those who had seen the encounter noticed a shift in the Apex ranks. No more shoves, no more tricks, only distance, and eyes that looked away when he passed. He became the anomaly, the one they could not break, could not read, could not provoke. And for a place like Apex Prime, that was more dangerous than any blade or plasma rifle, because no one feared what they understood, they feared what they could not predict. And Marcus was becoming unpredictable, not through action but through inaction, not through power but through restraint. And the instructors started to whisper, maybe the human was not here to learn, maybe he was here to watch, to judge, to wait for something none of them could see coming. Rumors spread. One said Marcus once fought in a war. No one returned from. Another claimed he was only here to observe tactics, but no one could deny he watched every fight like he was solving it. He was always present at every match, every drill, every simulation, not as a participant but as a shadow. He leaned against walls or sat on crates, silent, unmoving, eyes locked on the field, while the others bled and struggled and shouted through the chaos. Marcus was a statue with a mind behind it, a calculating, cold presence that unnerved even the Apex instructors. They reviewed footage trying to understand his pattern, but found nothing abnormal in motion. No enhanced speed, no augmented reflexes, no trick the sensors could detect, but something about his posture, his timing, the way he blinked just once before someone made a mistake. It all felt off, like he knew how the scenario would play out before it began. Some believed he had some forbidden tech, a predictive AI hidden under his skin. Others thought he was a relic of old Earth intelligence designed in labs and buried beneath peace treaties, never intended to wake. Whatever the truth was, he had become a quiet obsession to some and a growing threat to others, especially among the Apex elite who prided themselves on dominance and order and could not stand what they could not command. One by one, they tried to test him in secret, off record drills, shadow challenges, physical traps, but none succeeded, not because Marcus struck back, but because he was never where they expected him to be. He walked through each ambush like he had read the script in advance, and left before the first line was delivered. One night, during storm cycle, when training paused due to electrical interference, a small group of Drask and Apex surrounded him in the lower deck hallways, where the lights flickered and the walls hummed with static. They said it was not a fight, just a discussion, just a friendly test, but their stances told the truth, and everyone watching from the shadows knew what would happen. Marcus looked at each of them once, not with fear or anger or challenge, but with the same tired patience he gave to malfunctioning drones. The lights cut out for 20 seconds. When they returned, all five were on the floor, groaning and unable to stand, and Marcus was walking away down the hall like nothing had changed, like he had simply stepped over a crack in the floor. They reported injuries consistent with stun rounds, except no weapon was found, and no footage showed him move, but the message was received, and no one ever cornered him. Again a quiet report was sent up, the chain marked low priority, but flagged by a commander, who read the attached notes and frowned deeply, because the only thing more dangerous than a soldier who fought was a soldier who did not need to, and the file on Marcus Vol was now drawing attention far above the academy levels in places where wars were not trained for but decided with whispers. On the fifth day, during the Apex Gauntlet Challenge, the largest of them stepped forward, nearly 3 meters tall, his voice echoing through the arena, calling Marcus a disgrace and demanding a fight. The gauntlet was an ancient tradition, a brutal Test of strength, dominance and fear, where challengers stood alone in the ring while others came one by one to try and break them. The last to fall, the last to stand, earned the respect of the elite, and this cycle it was Apex protocol to open the trial with blood and noise and spectacle. His name was Karnas, and he was the pinnacle of the Apex line, a towering monster of engineered biology, armor fused to muscle, rage carved into his voice. He had survived 22 campaigns across 5 sectors, and had never once been knocked off his feet. He had already flattened 4 challengers that morning, each with a different style, each shattered and pulled off the ring. Before they could even crawl away, his body was steaming, his fists dripping with synthetic adrenaline, and he was laughing as he turned to the instructor and pointed to Marcus. The crowd reacted instantly, a roar of approval from recruits and veterans alike, because finally the silent ghost would have to face the storm. Finally, the calm would be tested against the fire. Karnas shouted for the human to step forward, dared him, insulted him, questioned his ancestry, mocked Earth and every system it ever lost. But Marcus did not move. Not at first. He sat where he always sat, near the edge of the arena, eyes half-closed, boots dusty from morning drills, until the instructor repeated the challenge and protocol forced compliance. Then Marcus stood and everything changed. He walked to the center, without armor, without gloves, without expression, while Karnas pounded his fists against his chest and the ring vibrated under the pressure of his weight. Marcus said nothing, not even when the instructor listed the rules, not even when Karnas promised to leave nothing intact when it was over. And the moment the signal tone sounded, Karnas charged with a sound like thunder, fists high, aiming to end the fight in one blow, as he always did. But Marcus did not move until the very last moment, and when he did, it was not with speed, was with precision. His foot slid back just enough to shift balance, his body turned just enough to avoid contact, and Karnas missed, not by much but by enough. And in that heartbeat Marcus stepped in, low, one hand against the ground, the other slicing upward in a perfect arc, striking a point just beneath the jawline where armor did not reach. There was no loud crack, no blood, no broken limbs. Just silence as Karnas froze mid-motion, his body locked in place, his eyes wide, his legs buckling beneath him, and then he fell face first into the sand with a sound that echoed through the bones of the arena. Recruits stood mouths open, instructors stared, even the Apex elite watched in stunned stillness, because Karnas was not just beaten, he was dismantled. Marcus stood over him for a moment, looked down, and then turned and walked away, without a word, while the gauntlet crowd watched the first shift in dominance they had ever seen from someone who never raised his voice. The class roared, the instructors did not interfere, and slowly Marcus walked to the circle, without hesitation, without warming up, without speaking, while the Apex elite prepared to crush him for good. The gauntlet was over, but Karnas's defeat had left a fracture in the foundation of Apex Prime, and in that fracture the hunger for redemption grew louder and more desperate. The elites could not accept that one of their own had fallen so easily to a human without augmentation, without aggression, without even visible effort. Whispers became warnings. Instructors held private conferences behind sealed walls, while recruits trained harder, not out of duty but out of fear, the fear that whatever Marquez represented was real and rising, and no one had the tools to contain it. The Apex High Command sent observers in plain uniforms and unmarked datapads, pretending to be staff, but their eyes always tracked Marcus, their fingers always tapping notes when he moved. Marcus ignored them all. He trained the same way every day, simple drills alone, away from the main field, measured movements, weightless strikes, balanced routines that looked like nothing special until you saw the precision and realized he was practicing sequences that matched no known fighting style. No database could trace the flow of his combat form, and the system's AI could not categorize his technique. Every move seemed designed to flow into 5 others and end in none. He was not training to fight, he was training to end. Then came the next challenge, not official, not sanctioned, not even warned. 3 Apex elite stepped into the arena during a simulation drill, locking the environment into close quarters mode with hard gravity spikes and shifting terrain. The instructors did not stop them. Maybe they wanted to see it, maybe they believed Marcus had just been lucky before, maybe they hoped this would restore the balance of dominance, but no one told Marcus it was coming. And yet when the simulation started, he was already moving before the terrain began to shift. The first Apex charged from the left, and was met with a sidestep and a single strike to the throat, dropping him before the others could blink. The second came with a leaping axe kick and was caught midair, turned, flipped and dropped onto a jagged terrain. node spine first immobilized, the third tried to flank him, but Marcus pivoted low, swept his feet, and struck his wrist with a downward elbow, disarming him before guiding him face first into the control panel, ending the sim early with the silent shutdown. The silence that followed was not like the others. It was heavier, filled with something close to awe, but laced with rising tension, because it was no longer possible to deny it. Marcus had not just defeated Apex warriors, he had done so without being touched, without escalating, without even breathing hard, and for a place that lived and bled for war, this was not just unusual. It was unnatural. He stood in the middle of the ruined sim field, the lights flickering, the broken forms of three Apex lying behind him, and he turned slowly toward the instructors as if asking what comes next. None of them had an answer. The fight began and ended in the same breath. The Apex charged, but Marcus slipped under his swing, turned and dropped him with a single blow to the spinal node, then walked away as silence fell. It was not just the speed that stunned them, it was the simplicity. There were no wasted motions, no extra force, no dramatic flair. Just clean precision, like he had practiced that exact move 1,000 times. Not against a training dummy, but against this exact opponent in this exact setting. And now, that moment had arrived. He simply executed what he already knew would work. The Apex elite did not move. The medics came, quickly, sensors scanning for vital damage, and while he would live, the injury was clean, direct, and absolute. A strike calibrated, not to kill but to destroy. Control. Marcus had known exactly where to hit, and how hard, and the fact that he did it without enhancement or tech meant he had mapped the elite's physiology in advance, studied him enough to see the flaw, and kept that knowledge to himself until the moment came. The recruits stared, some with fear, some with curiosity, some with the look of soldiers, trying to decide whether they had just seen something divine or something dangerous. One Lothan whispered that the human was an ancient weapon, a blade hidden beneath the skin of peace, and every day of silence had only been the sheath holding it. Back from the high deck, an instructor turned off the training monitor and asked quietly who taught him that, but no one could answer because the records showed no formal training in Apex anatomy. No advanced strike targeting, no classified access to the elite's file, and the only conclusion was that Marcus had learned it. By observation, by watching, by listening, by waiting, which made it worse because it meant he was not using data, he was using instinct. That night, the barracks were quiet, not from fear but from recalibration. Every recruit, every species had to now ask a new question. Not, can I beat him, but, do I even understand what he is? The Apex elite were divided. Some wanted him removed before he unbalanced the structure. Others wanted him studied, copied, turned into protocol, while a few began to treat him with quiet respect, nodding when he passed, making room for him at the wait stations, mimicking his drills without acknowledging it. Marcus responded the same way he always did, with silence, with motion, with patience. The instructors met again, late under secure protocols, debating his presence. One argued he should be accelerated, moved to command, placed where his precision could serve others. Another warned that he was a variable too large, too unknown, too disruptive, and one old war tactician simply said, he is not ready yet, because he is still waiting for something, and none of us know what that is. But Marcus knew. He lay on his bunk, eyes open, hands folded over his chest, listening to the wind rattle through the metal ducts, and behind those calm, unmoving eyes was a map, a countdown, and a purpose, because today was not the moment, but it was close, and when that moment came, he would not need to raise his voice, because his silence would be the loudest sound in the room. No one mocked him again. They replayed the footage for weeks, trying to decode how he moved, what he saw, but Marcus never explained. He only trained alone from then on, and no Apex ever challenged him again. The footage was dissected by analysts, instructors, commanders, and even rival academies. They slowed it frame by frame and still could not find the moment when advantage shifted, could not pinpoint how control passed from the Apex to the human. It was as if Marcus had not responded, but had already known, and their simulations could not model knowing. Only reacting recruits, who once laughed at him, now studied his footwork, trying to copy his rhythm. Others watched how he stood, how he breathed, how he moved between drills, like every motion served a function none of them understood. Some began to speak to him, not with mockery but with cautious respect, testing the space around him for permission to learn. But Marcus did not speak. He only nodded, or didn't, and that was enough. The instructors adjusted their evaluations, quietly giving him marks higher than protocol allowed, adding footnotes about influence and presence and destabilizing Clarity, a term one of them used after watching Marcus spar with a drone and making it crash, not with force but with positioning alone. He no longer needed to win anything because no one questioned what would happen if he chose to. The Apex Elite held internal sessions, now unannounced and locked from observation. They spoke about Marcus not as a rival but as a variable, a shift in their order because everything they had built was based on dominance, on fear, on the need to be louder and harder and faster. But Marcus had turned all of that into silence and stillness and precision, and somehow, it had become stronger than anything they had ever trained for. Then, one morning, without warning, without ceremony, a message arrived on the Central Command Terminal, a request from High Command. Not a suggestion, not a recommendation, but an order transfer. One individual, Marcus Vald, destination classified, purpose redacted. The instructors stood in silence, reading the file. No one spoke for a long time, and then the lead trainer turned to the others and simply said, "He was never ours." Marcus packed in. Minutes carried no gear left, nothing behind. He walked to the landing pad as the transport ship descended through the clouds, the same way he had walked to his first drill. The same way he had walked to every fight, with calm purpose, as if the universe was simply catching up to a plan already written. He paused once at the gate, turned to look at the arena below, now filled with recruits sparring under the sun of Apex Prime, and for the first time someone thought they saw the corner of his mouth, twitched like a shadow of a smile. He boarded the ship alone, the doors sealed, and the thrusters lifted him toward the sky, while the silence he left behind lingered heavier than any battle cry. And from that day on, the Apex instructors spoke his name, only in private, and when they did they said one thing: when the Silent One moved, the balance changed.